Good morning again. Brian's here for session 7 of our 16-week adoption, parenting, coaching, and certification course. And this morning we are going to be getting into understanding what doesn't work and why. And the reason I want to get into this is it gives us a little bit of a review from our previous sessions, and it also starts to establish the foundation as we move into, we've kind of gone through, kind of establishing our foundation of looking at the adoptive-parent dynamics, looking at stress, looking at trauma. Now I'm going to start transitioning us into some of the more day-to-day application of the work, although it's all day-to-day application, but specifically looking at the parenting tools and techniques that kind of make up the model, although my fundamental belief is that we ultimately have to move beyond tools and techniques. I believe as long as we are operating from a perspective of this tool or this technique, then we're always going to be struggling, because ultimately tools and techniques are very cognitive in nature. And anytime your child has a behavior issue and you have to kind of go through and process what tool or what technique you should use in this moment, or how you should do it, then ultimately you're in a very cognitive state of mind rather than an emotional state, which is where you need to be. You need to be able to engage emotionally. You need to be able to connect at that level. And that is when you are really addressing your child at a level beyond their consciousness and beyond their behaviors, beyond their acting out. So this morning we're going to get into looking at some of the most common parenting techniques that are out there, and this is going to help you kind of get a good understanding, a good framework of why what you do may not be effective. I think a lot of times people don't understand that. I'm all the time kind of stripping away, like all of the common behavioral things that we do, all the common parenting things that we do. But I don't want to just strip them away. I want you to understand why they don't work, and rather than them being stripped, I want them to just fall away naturally. And when you do go back, when you do revert back to them, because you have to understand that these techniques that we're going to be talking about this morning, they are a part of our dominant culture. They're a part of our parenting blueprints. And we talked about our parenting blueprints, but they make up who we are. So at a state level, they're still very much a part of our personality. And so you will, in times of stress, especially high levels of stress, when the brainstem starts to get really activated, you're going to revert back to these parenting techniques simply because that's what's there. I mean, that's what's in your state level of memory. I mean, the things that we've been talking about, these things are not in your state level of memory. I mean, love is in your state level, but it's at the bottom. It's like at the very bottom of the filing cabinet. It's at the very bottom of the bowl of soup, if you will, and that's because that's what God put in us. So we are at our most core essence a loving being, but our experiences, after conception and after we are born, is what creates and breeds all of the fear that goes into our day-to-day living and our day-to-day struggle and our day-to-day challenges in relationship. So I want to look at these things with you, and I want to go through them and just really kind of talk through them and help you kind of develop a framework of understanding. And I really want to encourage you at this point, because we're at session 7 now, so I really want to encourage you to start going back to session 1, session 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and start reviewing. Now's the time to start creating some more repetition, because as we move out of some of the theoretical conversations and as we move away from some of the neuroscience, although I'm going to continue to weave this through everything we do, I want you to go back and start having some repetition because that's how it starts to make sense. Emotional impact and repetition, those are the ways you change the brain. So if you really want to, in times of stress, if you really want to have this information available to you to recall, you're going to have that repetition. So without any further ado, let's look here at the brain, or stress, emotion, and brain development. In any given situation, as best we can, we want to be able, let me get my little pen activated. We want to be able to activate the oxytocin response. And in any given moment, when our children are struggling, they are being activated at the amygdala, which is releasing their cortisol. And if we are being activated because of their behavior, then the same is occurring to us. Our cortisol is being engaged, and when that occurs, it stirs the brainstem. When the brainstem gets stirred, not only are all the autonomic nervous system processes operating, the adrenaline, the heart rate, the pupils dilating, all of that, but our state level of memories are getting stirred up. So we want to be able to engage our children when they are at the level of activation. Remember, an acting out child is fundamentally a stressed out child. Additionally, when we stress, we regress. So if you can make that connection between these two. Now, this is not just children, though. This is for us as adults too. I mean, it's all consistent across the age span. I mean, anytime we stress, we are likely to regress. Anytime we are acting out, it's because we are stressed out. So if you can keep in mind that when your child is acting out, it's because they are stressed out. That means they are having an overabundance of cortisol, an over outpouring of cortisol, and their oxytocin response is not working effectively. When we're talking about adopted children, we're talking about children with depressed oxytocin responses, with suppressed oxytocin response, delayed oxytocin response, deficient oxytocin response. And dependent on the experiences, last session we talked a lot about trauma. So depending on the intensity and the nature of the trauma is going to be the intensity and sensitivity of the amygdala, which is going to explain the increase in cortisol and the decrease in oxytocin. So not only are we talking about the increase in cortisol and the decrease in oxytocin, but we're also talking about how that suppresses the hippocampus, the short-term memory, and confuses and distorts our thinking. So see how I continually go back to some of those really basic statements that I share with you all. In times of stress, our thinking is confused and distorted, and our short-term memory is suppressed. Make these little statements just like vitamins. I mean, just like amino acids, like proteins, like building blocks of your psyche, of your consciousness. Just bury this in your brain. This is so important when it comes to your paradigm shift, making the paradigm shift, and that's what really this is about. It is completely changing the way you see things. And so we have to have that understanding. We have to have that repetition, because I want your lens to change. I mean, I don't want you to continue to ride the fence. This is not about fence riding. There is no gray area in this. This is very black and white. When Alan Shore says the core of the self is unconscious and nonverbal and lies in patterns of affect regulation, there is no gray area to that. This is very black and white, and I want you to understand that. And I don't want to be dogmatic, but when it comes to love and fear, there is no gray area. There's no I almost love you, or I almost fear you, or I almost experience love, or I almost experience fear. It's very black and white. And I don't think that people take that serious enough, because I really don't believe that they understand at the core. If you understand at the core, it's very simple. I mean, it's very clear. Now, granted, with our blueprints, we will revert and we will regress, and that's okay. See, within love, there's no judgment. There is only understanding and the seeking to grow. So you don't want to judge yourself. You just want to acknowledge when you regress, and that's okay, because then you can look at it, you can move forward, and you can do better the next time. You have to continually challenge yourself. Continually look for opportunities to be able to do better and to improve. And I believe that that's what our children do. Our children give us such a great opportunity to continue to challenge ourselves to grow. I mean, without stress, and that's why I said to you in one of the earlier sessions, the single greatest opportunity for healing lies in the midst of your child's struggle. Because that's when not only are they in their state level, but it's when you're being challenged at your state level. And so I really want you to think about that. And you know what, that brings up a pretty important little not a little memory for me. I had just recently I found out that a young lady who we had in one of our treatment homes in Virginia had passed away. Well, she's only 22 years old. She could have only been 22 years old, and her name was Yuli. And I remember when I went and got Yuli from the treatment center in Florida. And so when I found out she had passed away, I asked her therapeutic foster parent, his name's Ed, we still stay in touch. I said, well, what had happened? And he said, I don't know, they won't tell me. And see, here's the thing. I mean, in my gut, I knew right away that there was some foul play, because I'm pretty sure she was still in some kind of adult facility at this point, maybe some kind of group home or something. And let me see what I think we had. Oh, I went off. Oh, that's not good. I have I disconnected. Interesting. Let me see. Once I have internet access. So you guys can't hear me? That's not good. I wonder what happened. Am I back? Am I on yet? Still on? Donnie's little buddy is peeking through the window. You know, open the door and just tell her. Let me see. Hang on just a minute. Okay. Oh, now I'm back on. Interesting. I wonder what happened, because I didn't get any sign that I had gone off the air. Well, thanks for letting me know, Diana. Okay. All right, so we're back in business. So this young lady, I'm pretty sure she was still living in some kind of long-term care, because she had some pretty significant developmental delays. And I remember when I went and picked her up from Florida that she had exhausted every level of care in Virginia. I mean, she had been through everything, and they had sent her to this facility in Florida. And hang on just a moment. And it had been her treatment in the facility in Florida was less than stellar. I mean, her arm had been broken in a restraint during one incident, and she was so hypersensitive. I mean, talk about amygdala activation. And she was, at the same time, she was just this beautiful soul of a little girl who had came from, I believe it was Russia or Romania. I think it was Romania when she was a baby, and she was not even a baby. I think she was like 3 years old, and she had came here to have a cleft palate surgery, and she never went back. And so even the circumstances around that were really strange. There was really no, I mean, it really seemed as if this child had been kidnapped. And so, when he told me that the other day, I just remember when I went to pick her up and how sensitive she had been. And I think that her social services department, they were, no one wanted to go and get her. They were all afraid of her. I mean, that was the thing. They were all afraid. And I said, well, I'll go get her and I'll bring her back. And I did. I went over and I got her, and she was very excited to see me. She acted like she'd known me forever. And I remember we were driving back to the airport, and we'd stopped at a little rest area to use the restroom, and we were walking across the little street to going to the bathroom area, and I went to put my hand on her elbow, just being cautious of cars coming across, and she jumped and she said, "Don't do that. Don't do that. As soon as you do that, I feel like you're going to restrain me, and then I'm going to hit you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Thanks for letting me know. Thanks for letting me know." And it was remarkable how sensitive she was. And so we eventually got her back to Virginia and placed her with the Daffins, Ed and Vera. And they had Yulie until she was, I think, probably 19 years old. So they had her for almost 4 years. And previous to this, she had never been able to live in a family. And they really loved her. I mean, she made so much progress. She had lots of neurologic deficiencies, though, in addition to her severe PTSD. And, I think there was so much possibility for this young lady, but to be caught up in such a fearful system, because we eventually stopped doing the treatment homes, and the Daffins continued working with another facility, and they just were not supportive of the model. They were not supportive of the Daffins. In fact, it was interesting because even the licensing board, the approval board that helped get her back, there were actually two faculties of this approval. There was the community board, and then there was another board, and one of the boards, they just were not supportive. And it just went beyond my comprehension how we could be doing really well with this young lady, and how they could be so not supportive. And it was simply because they had never been successful in having her placed. And there was something about what we were doing with her was very threatening for them, and they just were not supportive. And I don't know, it's just very interesting. So it just crossed my mind as I was thinking about the intensity of the cortisol and the oxytocin, and how that plays out and how significant that is. All right, so let's move on. So let's talk about what some of these behavior, these tools and techniques are. Let's see. So exploring the parenting continuum, here's what I want you to be able to comprehend is when we are engaging in the behaviors that we're going to be engaging in, talking about the tools and techniques, sometimes I can't always shift my my screen. It's very interesting when that happens. when we're talking about the following tools and techniques, here's the thing I want you to realize. I want you to realize that the fear and the reactivity that underlies each one of them, and in that same regard, they are these tools and techniques. The ones I have listed here on the parenting continuum. The timeout, isolation, spanking, consequences. And we're going to get into a lot. I think I've got a list of about 12 of them. When I placed these, I created this parenting continuum. I basically was thinking about a number line. And if you think about how a number line operates, and people in math have said, you got that backwards. I really don't. This is the way I see it in my head. In my head, the negative side is going down, and to me that just feels like that needs to be the right side, and the positive side is going up, and it just feels like it needs to be the left side. But if you think about the negative side, I call it negative 1 through 10, and I call it negative 1 through 10 because these are the most common things that we do in parenting. And what we don't realize, these are the day-to-day parenting tools and techniques, and in fact, so much of this makes up therapy these days, and that there's no therapy occurring at all when you are, as a therapist, when you are teaching parents these tools and techniques. There's no therapy occurring. These are all parenting techniques, and so these are the most common things we do. And what we fail to realize is that on the continuum of reactivity and fear, the far extreme is the death penalty. Negative 100. Well, on the opposite of that, on positive 1 through 10, the far extreme of the responsibility and love side of the continuum is perfect love. It's positive 100, and that's the way that God loves us. God loves us perfectly. There's no discrepancy. It is not. There's no faltering. There's no wavering. It is perfect, and that is, the far extreme of the positive side of the continuum, responsibility and love. But over here on the negative side, these are the most common things we do, and we don't realize it, that they set on the same continuum as the death penalty because they're so common, because this is so often what we do. And the reality is if we really realize that these set on the things we're going to be talking about, these common parenting tools and techniques, if we really realize that they set on the side of the continuum as the death penalty, then we could clearly see that they are not effective, that they do not create healing. And maybe we should talk about what's effective and what's not. How do we define effective? Do we define effective as achieving an outcome? Or do we define effective when it comes to parenting adopted children, to parenting children in general? Do we define effective as a healing process? I think we need to make some distinction between the two. If we define effective as an outcome, then that pretty clearly demonstrates why we use these specific tools and techniques, why they're so common. Because the reality is all of these, from the standpoint of effective being an outcome, achieving an outcome, a very specific outcome, and that will be, in this instance, a behavioral outcome, then we can oftentimes achieve these things if all we're focused on is behavior. But if what we're focused on is healing, then I want you to see something different. Because if we're focused on just a behavioral outcome and we're calling that effective, then we can say these tools and techniques are very effective because they will oftentimes curb behavior. They will oftentimes suppress behavior. So occasionally they will change behavior. Because what they do is they increase fear. These are all very externally based. All of these are externally based. They're external. They don't teach internal. See, and that's why they don't teach love. They're all externally based. What they end up teaching is fear. And what we don't realize is that we use these things because they are considered by our society as being effective. The reason they are considered effective is because they work for 70% of children. Okay, but I'm gonna pop up. I'm gonna go back a slide. Let's see. How do I do this? Oh, I don't want to do that. Previous. 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 70% of children have an amygdala that reacts in a normal way. It is an amygdala that is not overly sensitive. And even when the event is highly stressful, 70% of children have a very effective oxytocin response. See, these are children who are not adopted. These are children who've not spent an extensive period of time in foster care. These are children who ultimately traumatic events they may have experienced were very short term. They were short-term stressful events. They were not long-term stressful events. And in many instances, for 70% of the children, they had opportunities at some level to express, process, and understand. So these children, for instance, after they were born, maybe they had some kind of birth trauma. Well, they had parents who were able to be there with them in ICU. The operative word being they had parents who were able to be there with them in ICU, who could hold them, who could, in that process touch them, talk to them, soothe them. All these very important oxytocin-related functions. So when these children experience an amygdala reaction, they have a counter oxytocin response, which helps their brains to stay balanced. These are children who grow up in homes. These are a lot of your biological children who grow up in homes that may be stressful, but day in and day out, they're predictable. They're consistent. They're nurturing. There's discipline, which is teaching. Now that discipline, it may border on punishment, but because of this, because of the oxytocin ability, which occurred from this during those first, 0 to 3 years of life, 0 to 2 even, because 90%, I don't know if you all know this, but 90% of adults believe that it is okay to spank children 2 years old and younger. 90% of adults believe that it is okay to spank children 2 years old and younger, and that research comes from Murray Strauss. He is a spanking researcher, a corporal punishment researcher, and I've got some very dear friends at Old Dominion University who study corporal punishment and abuse of children, violence against children. And so if you think about, then why are there 70% of children that can handle, quote unquote, our really common tools and techniques? It's because their first 0 to 2 years of life, they get lots of good stuff. Soothing, talking, touching, holding, predictability, consistency, nurturing, affection, attunement. Okay, when they cry, they have a parent who comes and soothes them, who comes and takes care of them, who comes and looks after them. They have nutrition. They have good food going into their systems. See, all of this is strengthening the brain. All this is helping the brain develop in a very effective way. So then when it comes to utilizing some of our more common tools and techniques, then, you know, these children, they are able to withstand the challenges that get presented. So they're able to withstand the reactivity and fear. They're able to withstand the continuum of the death penalty because they have that balance. And I think we have a hard time with that. So I call these tools and techniques the paddling upstream. The first is bribery, and there's no real order to any of these. These are just common ones we do, and I'll go ahead and put them up here. We have points and rewards, timeout, yelling, spanking, medication, grounding. All right, just to begin. And what I want to look at here is let's talk about them for a moment. When you're talking about bribery, well, that's pretty basic, and that happens typically as, you know, if you go into the store and you behave, then I'll buy you something. You know, at the most basic level, and it just goes up. It just goes up from there. In fact, points and rewards is a form of bribery, if you want to get, you know, really specific. And so when I talk about points and rewards, I'm talking about, you know, the STAR charts, the common behavior modification kind of charts and tools that we use in schools. And, you know, you've got the STAR chart, you got the red light, green light, yellow light system that's used. You know, these are all forms of bribery, which in ways they say to the child, if you behave for a certain period of time, then you're going to get this positive thing. Well, let me tell you how bribery works and why bribery is effective for behavior modification with 70% of children, and occasionally why it possibly works with traumatized children. It's because as soon as the parent says to the child walking into the store, if you'll behave, I'll buy you a candy bar. Well, that immediately paints a resonant memory in the child's brain, and that's one of sugar. Well, guess what? That resonant memory, I mean, has been a part of the child's makeup and existence since they were born. So that candy bar, that representation of sugar, what it actually does to the child's brain in that moment is it releases oxytocin. So when you say to the child, if you'll behave, I'll buy you a candy bar, then what you're actually doing is you are eliciting an oxytocin moment in that child's brain. So guess what the child does once they get that opportunity? They calm down. Right? And so we see that. We're looking at that, and this is, let me tie this back real quick. Let me tie this back to why we do these things. If we go back to my little brain slide, and we have the amygdala here. The amygdala, remember, is all emotional. It doesn't think. It only sees a threat. Okay? So the amygdala is geared and oriented towards these tools and techniques because these are ways to eliminate behavior. These are ways to suppress behavior, to control behavior, which is how we can suppress and control threats. This is how we eliminate threats. So see, the amygdala has a repetition here. the amygdala of the adult, of the parent, says to the child, this is a repetition, says, if I can say, if you'll behave, you'll get something, and then and I see the child behaving, then that reinforces to me that bribery is something that I should use on a regular basis. But what the amygdala is not comprehending is that oxytocin runs through the brain in a very short period of time. So what we do is then we see the child trying to behave. The child is doing their best to behave. As they're doing their best to behave, they actually start to become more stressed, but they're using their window of tolerance to the best of their ability to maintain their behavior so they can get the reward. Well, every single parent who's ever bribed a child has never received perfect behavior from the child. It just typically doesn't happen because children are children. They are emotional. So typically they're going to do something that's going to kind of sway outside of the lines of what the amygdala would perceive as you know, a threat versus a non-threat. So the child's going to get a little too loud in the store. They're going to take off running, or they're going to touch something, or they're going to knock something over. But the parent says, hey, if you don't act right, you're not going to get the candy bar. So again, boom, we got a little oxytocin response, but then we have an increase in cortisol. Okay, so we get all the way through the grocery store. The child probably has made, 60% of progress, 70% of progress, what have you. And we go ahead and give them the candy bar. Well, we have a repetition that says at that moment the child is capable of behaving. So we are irrationally led to believe in the moment that the child actually can behave if they want to. See, so we have this negative reinforcement. They can behave if they want to. We don't associate it with any of the brain chemistry that just occurred. And then what happens, the child gets the candy bar. Candy bar tastes really good, but guess what else? Now the child's exhausted. The child has utilized their resources for getting through the source. So within a short period of time, now you have the sugar and the insulin in the system. Now the child's becoming more sensitive. They're more stressed. Now the parent starts to see the negative behavior of the child coming up again, and they start to become more frustrated because they said, you just behaved appropriately in the grocery store, so why are you acting out now? Well, unless there is a bigger reward, unless there is a bigger point of bribery, guess what? The child doesn't get the oxytocin response because the oxytocin response is occurring externally by use of the bribe. It is not occurring internally in reflection to the relationship. And that's why bribery is not okay, because bribery is not supporting the development of the child's regulation. It's not supporting the development of the child's oxytocin response. All it's doing is using an external source to trigger an oxytocin response in the child's brain, which is not developing the child's own oxytocin response. It's only triggering a momentary oxytocin release, but then it is counterbalanced by the cortisol that starts to develop in the dynamic. And so then all we can do is bribe more from this point, bribe more. And how many times have you, as a parent, or have you seen and experienced, it starts at a candy bar and then it goes all the way up to a $100 game system. Could you have me start using the back door, please? It goes all the way up to a $100 game system. It goes all the way up to a new car. It goes all the way up to, the shopping sprees, the trips. And you see parents get constantly stuck in this dynamic, and they're not able to get out of it. And then they feel resentful because their amygdalas are now getting activated. They're getting overwhelmed. So they're not able to make the shift at this point, and then they want to blame the child. They want to make it the child's fault. They want to say the child is spoiled. The child's just not doing what they're supposed to do, what they're capable of doing. Well, we've never taught the child anything different. So see how bribery plays out? And then points and rewards is the same thing. It falls along the same continuum. I mean, anytime you are giving the child an external point of reference as the reason for their control, You are not taking the opportunity to teach them the regulatory ability necessary to learn how to release oxytocin in the face of stress. We're using something external, and we've gotten ourselves into a really tough position in our society because of this very reason. So we use these mechanisms in school as forms of behavior control. That's what these are. These are all forms of behavior control. But here's the problem. Behavior control fundamentally has to occur from an internal place of oxytocin response, which is ultimately allowing us to be regulated. Otherwise, if you remove the regulation, if you remove the oxytocin, if you remove the internal teaching, behavior control is then only relegated by threat. It is only relegated by fear. It is only relegated by motivation or lack of motivation to make one feel better. And so we lose all relationship when we revert back to this process. The same can be said for timeout. I always say children don't act out for attention. Children act out because they need attention. A child is acting out because they don't have the regulatory ability to soothe themselves. So when we give a child timeout, which I don't know where that came from. I don't even know where timeout came from. It's just, to me, it's just a steady evolution. It started from putting your nose in the corner. It started from, the slave being locked in the what's that thing they used to put the person in and the slave in the middle of the community, as a shaming process. But then it just kind of evolves. All these things have evolved into parenting, and we ask ourselves, why is the world so screwed up? Think about what we do with kids. Think about what's been done with us as kids. The levels of shame we use. There's so much shame, the level of emotional absence and rejection. It's just not very hard. It's just not very hard to see how we have screwed up this world. It's just not very hard to see to understand why our children are so messed up. Because we are just not teaching them love. All of these things are external to the child. Even the medication. Medication, it does not heal. It does not heal the brain. All it does is manipulate the chemistry to bring about behavior control. That's all it does. That's all medication does, is it manipulates brain chemistry to influence behavior control. And parents are consistently led to believe that there's some kind of healing. But no, people always want to talk about marijuana being a gateway. We need to be talking about psychiatric medications being a gateway. Because then we're falsely led to believe that while the child's getting this pill, and see, this goes back again to the amygdala. The child's getting this pill, so they should be behaving better. Well, that's all external. Nothing is developing internally for the child. There's no oxytocin being taught. There's no regulation that's being developed. There's no relationship that's being enhanced, that's being restored. There's no trauma that's being worked with or dealt with. And so the brain is just getting older. That's all it's doing. It's just getting older. It's just getting closer to, if we start with small children, then the brain's just moving closer to the point in which it starts to prune away everything that's not useful. We're just losing the opportunity. And the child is just learning the only way to control themselves is through medication or through alcohol or through cigarettes or through shopping or through fighting or yeah, it just goes on and on and on. Sleeping, running, I mean, overeating food. I mean, it just goes on and on. Grounding, you know, is much the same. Talk about spanking. Gosh, you know, I just feel like at this point, for me, these things they're so clear in my mind why you don't do them. And so it's just, I literally get overwhelmed when I'm talking about them. Like spanking. How can we believe at any level that hitting a child, don't call it spanking, call it hitting. How can we believe at any level that hitting has anything to do with healing? It doesn't. See, that's important. Again, we'll go back to, what's your definition of effective? Is your definition of effective going to be behavior change? Or is your definition of effective going to be healing? So that can really influence your use of techniques and tools. Because spanking, yes, can change behavior momentarily for a short period of time. But see, healing can change behavior forever. Over here, if it's just behavior control, it's short term. As soon as you spank, you create more stress, you create more cortisol. Every single one of these techniques, they increase cortisol and they decrease oxytocin. And when you're talking about adopted children, traumatized children, then really what you're also doing is, when you hit a child who has a trauma history, then you are, in that child's brainstem, associating yourself with the perpetrator in their life. You become negatively associated as someone who has inflicted pain upon me, just like the source of my original pain. And I believe that is very important for parents to see. I don't know how to communicate any other way. That's not okay. I mean, we can use biblical verse. We can use biblical verse to confirm that it's okay to spank. You know, spare the rod, spoil the child. But the rod and the staff were used in the raising of sheep. The shepherd, our shepherd, does not beat us with the rod. If the shepherd beats the sheep with the rod, the sheep run away, and then what happens? The sheep get eaten by the wolves. The rod and the staff are used to guide and to pull back into line, not to beat and abuse. Which is very important for us to really take that into consideration. You know, spare the rod, spoil the child speaks to sparing a child guidance, because the rod is used to guide. Spare a child guidance, and they will be spoiled to the ways of the world. If you don't use the rod to guide, and you don't use the staff to pull them back in when they're straying, then they're going to get eaten. You know, it's the difference between the straight and the narrow. The shepherd herds the sheep within the straight and the narrow to keep them safe. When they stray, they go outside, they get eaten. You know, spare a child guidance, and they will be spoiled to the ways of the world. Beat your children, and they will become fearful of you. Hit your children, and they will become fearful of you. Associate yourself with a point of stress and fear in your child's life, and they'll become fearful of you. When they're young, they have to go along with what you say and what you do, but when they get older, they're going to stray. It's just that simple. When they get older, you will lose any influence. And I call that the relationship factor. The relationship factor says in any given situation, the most important thing that you have to do is to be able to seek relationship, because relationship will always allow you to influence. But if you start to focus solely on the behavior, if you start to focus solely on the outcome, then you're going to lose relationship. You're reverting to control. When you revert to control, you're only going to be able to control your child until they are old enough to think for themselves, or at least believe they can think for themselves and make their own decisions. And then they're not going to listen to you anymore. You will lose control. And then what can you do? All you can do is seek to have more control. So the relationship factor positions you to be able to influence your child. You always want to be able to influence. And it should not require much more. Influence should not require much more than just being able to ask, just being able to make a statement. If you're not able to influence your child just by asking them, just by talking to them, then you got to spend more time on the relationship. I hope I didn't just lose you guys. You have to spend more time developing relationship, doing things that are more focused on relationship than focused on behavior. I call these things paddling up a stream without a paddle. What are others? Threats. Ignoring. Counseling. Why do I include counseling in this list? Because so many counselors want to just work with children. And so many counselors just want to do things that are behavior oriented. They just want to teach parents on how to control behavior, or how to manipulate behavior, how to suppress behavior. You know, counseling is the assisting of an individual in understanding their innermost dynamics so that they can become more conscious about how to make change in their lives. Assisting the individual in understanding their inner dynamics so they can be more conscious about how to make better decisions, different decisions in their lives at a conscious level. That's what counseling is supposed to be about. But so many parents get stuck seeing counselors who only want to work with the child. They don't want to work with the family. And the problem with that is that it's not creating a healing environment. It's not creating a therapeutic environment. It's not supporting oxytocin development. The majority of oxytocin development has to occur in the parent-child relationship. Consequences. Oh my gosh, I don't think I can talk about consequences today. I just don't. I'm not going to. This is going to be a quiz question. I want to get you guys feedback on consequences. It is so common. We believe that consequences have to teach responsibility. Consequences do not teach responsibility, because a consequence is a reaction to an action. And are there consequences in life? Are there natural consequences every single day? Absolutely there are. But those are natural consequences. You can't create those consequences. You can't prevent those consequences. That's why they're called natural. And we all learn from them at some level. At some level we learn from them, but it depends on your brain. If your brain in the moment of stress is not able to access short-term memory, you're not going to learn from a consequence, and that's one of the fundamental problems of consequences. We give children consequences in the midst of stress, which is the time when their thinking's confused and distorted and their short-term memory is suppressed. Guess what? That's why they don't learn. That's why we have to keep giving consequences. It's cause and effect thinking. See, a consequence is supposed to be teaching cause and effect thinking, but the problem is the child is stressed. And if the child is stressed, they cannot develop cause and effect thinking. How many adults do you know that have poor cause and effect thinking? It's because in the moment you are stressed, you cannot access your short-term memory. Consequences don't teach responsibility, they teach reactivity, and that's our society. We are geared towards consequences. We have the most difficult time getting outside of that thinking. The most difficult time. 1, 2, 3 magic, removal of privileges, isolation. They're all the same. They're all the same. Like I said, the relationship factor, it all goes back to the relationship factor. You have to be able to maintain the relationship as much as possible. When you can't maintain the relationship, you want to go back and you have to repair it. And that makes the relationship stronger. And that's going to bring us to the end of our class today. That's interesting. This is a tough class for me to teach. Because and this is why I spend so much time talking about the foundation. This is why I spend so much time talking about, the theory, the understanding the trauma, understanding the oxytocin, understanding the cortisol, understanding that thinking causes confused and distorted thinking and suppresses short-term memory, understanding that the scientific literature that says affect dysregulation is a fundamental mechanism involved in all psychiatric disorders. Being stressed out is a fundamental reason why we have behavior issues. Okay, so it's very important that you grasp this. So I hope this has been beneficial for you. I hope it's been useful. But I really want you to have repetition around this. So start going back and reviewing the other sessions. And let's continue moving forward. And with that, I'm going to close this session. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I look forward to talking to you at the next class.